So it has very little nutrients in it and gives it up slowly over time. Now that might sound bad. Oh my God, it doesn't have a lot and it doesn't give much. Well, the reality is your plants don't need a whole lot. Your plants need the nutrients they need, and then they don't need any more than that. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com. I did a video earlier this week talking about this particular garden bed and building the soil in it and how I built the soil and why that's so important and all the good results. I'll put a link to it at the end. And I talked about how I built this garden bed. I'll put a link to that in the end as well. I was showing off my wonderful dark red soil, and I mentioned that when I initially made this bed, I literally just put 4 logs down and filled the thing with horse manure and put some hay on top of it and walked away. So then as a result, I get all kinds of questions in the comments section about horse manure, and that's great. I get best ideas for videos from viewer comments. So I thought I'd speak to some of those questions and speak to questions about horse manure in the garden, and try to answer everything I could think of that questions people have asked me in the past as well. So number one, people will say, was that fresh manure or aged manure? And well, it was fresh and it was aged. So what do I mean? When I first built this garden, I built it in the fall, and why I'm doing this video also is this is a great time of year to build garden beds. If you're claiming new spaces, this is a good time of year to get out there and do it. And so I built this in the fall and didn't plant anything in it till well into the following spring. And the great thing, and I used relatively fresh horse manure. So, you know, there's a place I get it from. It's a horse stable down the road, and they just make a pile of horse manure, and I think twice a year some guy comes along with a tractor and takes it away. So in between those times, I can just sort of scrounge horse manure there. So the point is to say that any horse manure I get from this place has not been aged that long, 6 months or less. But the thing is about getting fresh manure, usually if you go to a horse stable, if they're going to give you free horse manure, it's fresh. They want to get rid of it, right? So they'll give you fresh manure, horse manure for free, some of them, and they're really, really well aged horse manure. They know it's worth something, and they'll usually charge you something from that. Still, it's usually pretty cheap. Usually like a half-ton truck, they'll charge you $50 for a half-ton truck of that, and that's a lot of good stuff, sort of thing. So I get this for free, and it wasn't that aged at all. But I was putting it here in the fall, and I, maybe let's say October-ish, and I cover it with some mulch. So it did a bit of breaking down until things got really, really cold, let's say January, February, and then it would have stopped. And then it would have started up again maybe in April sometime. And the following year I planted tomatoes here, so I actually didn't put anything in the ground here till, I don't know, late May, right? So it had aged a whole season, freezing and thawing, and some decomposition and so on and so forth. But also, the following season, so fall, I put the manure down, wasn't that aged. It aged to some extent over the course of the winter, and so we had a pretty cold winter here, but it did some aging. The following season, what did I plant? I did not plant root vegetables first season after that fall. I planted something that puts roots in the ground, but the part that I eat is above ground, right? I planted tomatoes in it, right? So I would recommend not planting something like a leafy vegetable or anything like that. One thing about putting fresh horse manure down, it is full of seeds. It's got a crazy amount of seeds. So you want to plant something that's a large plant that needs a lot of space, so that you can just have like in a bed like this, 4x8, maybe you only have 6 or 8 plants, and you mulch everything, or you put cardboard down or something like that to prevent all those grass seeds from germinating and coming up, right? Or maybe they germinate, but because you've smothered them, they just die. So the first actual growing season with your manure, you plant something that's producing the part that you want to eat above ground, and you plant something that's fairly big so that you can smother out, you don't have to bare a lot of the soil, you don't have to reveal a lot of the soil, you just got a couple little spots, little circles for the planting stuff. Squash is another good one. Squash, pumpkin, cucumber, all those things, you're planting them, you're gonna make a little space in the mulch, you're gonna get them growing, and then you're gonna cover everything up really good, and all the fruit they're producing is above ground. They're not in that sort of still breaking down manure, and you're greatly lowering the risk of, like if you're trying to grow potatoes or something like that in relatively fresh manure, you're running the risk. It could work out great, but you're running the risk of various kinds of pathogens or pests or problems getting into, or like a carrot or something like that. You're running a risk in that first growing season. And then after that whole growing season's gone by, and another entire winter has gone by, which is the case here, then you can plant your carrots and potatoes and stuff like that, and you know your risk has gone way down of problems. So that's the general approach. Now people will ask me, how did you plant directly into that horse manure? Well, you know, I'll put a link at the bottom. I'm not going to quote figures and stats here, but if you go look up, I'm going to put a link. It's a really good one. It has all the different kinds of manure and their nutrient values. If you look at horse manure, it's one of the weakest manures there is in terms of nutrient value. So it doesn't have to be sitting very long for it to be such that it's not going to burn the roots of plants. Like the tomatoes I planted the very first year, it still wasn't broken down that much, but the tomatoes grew fine. And I've done this with pumpkins and squash and cucumbers as well. Because it's got a very low amount of nutrient in it, and in any one given year, it doesn't give all that up. So it has very little nutrients in it and gives it up slowly over time. Now that might sound bad. Oh my God, it doesn't have a lot and it doesn't give much. Well, the reality is your plants don't need a whole lot. Your plants need the nutrients they need, and then they don't need any more than that. And the amount of nutrients that a manure releases in a given season, that's all your plants need. You look at my garden, and actually I haven't put manure down on hardly any of these. I don't think this year I put, I don't know, a couple of beds really, but the majority of my beds I didn't add any new manure. It's a good way to build a bed, but once you've got your beds established, just keep mulching. You don't need manure anymore, at least in my experience. But the great thing about it is that yes, it's got a low nutrient count, and yes, it only gives up a little bit of it every year. But it's giving your plants all they need. Your plants don't need a lot. They need what they need. Right? They're not going to take more than they need. You need a certain amount of vitamin C to avoid getting scurvy. But if you take extra vitamin C, it's not like you become get superpowers, right? Actually, a lot of the vitamins that we need, if we take too much of them, it's actually not good for us. And plants are no different. They need what they need. So your manure is going to give the plants what they need. It's going to give it up slowly and release it over time. So you're going to get multiple years of that, while the life in the soil is developing and growing, and your soil is getting to a point where it's going to sustain itself with successive applications of just keeping it mulched, which is kind of where most of my beds are now. So that's why you can plant directly in horse manure. So it's free, it's got all the nutrients you need, and it gives them up slowly over multiple years. It sounds good, right? I think that's everything. Oh, one more question. Someone asked me was, doesn't that have, they give worms to horses. They give, deworming drugs to horses. They give antibiotics to horses, and that's going to be in the manure, and that's bad, and you're going to have all that mystery stuff in your soil. Now, I can't speak to every stable owner. The stable where I got my stuff, I talked to the stable owner about that, and I asked her, do you give your horses deworming drugs? Do you give them antibiotics? And she said, which makes perfect sense, we give it to them when they need it. If they have, we have a doctor and comes and looks at the horses once in a while. And if the doctor says that the horse has worms or it's got a problem, we give it, whatever medicine it needs. And then we stop giving it the medicine when it's better, because I don't know if you know this, but pharmaceuticals cost money. They're not cheap, right? And why would you give something to, I think the stable owner literally said, why would we give it to them all the time if they don't need it, right? They have to pay for that. It's not doing the horse any good. So they give the horse, what they need when they need it, and then they stop. Now, I can't speak to every stable, and you're going to have to, talk to the person you're getting your stuff from. But I mean, over the years, I've gotten manure from 3 different stables. I've been gardening sort of, in a serious way since I became a homeowner in 2004. And I've only ever used horse manure. I used chicken manure once, just a little bit, but it costs money. It costs a lot more than, you can get horse manure for free. I have never put horse manure down on my garden and killed all the worms in my garden. I think people get a little bit too worked up over these things. I mean, you'd have to speak directly to the person where you're getting it from. But my guess is that most stable owners are doing the same thing. The one that lives near me does. They're being very rational about it. They're using things when they have to, and then they don't use it when they don't have to because it costs money and it's not doing the horse any good. So perhaps there are some trace elements of some of those things in the manure, but it's probably very little. And I would have to imagine sitting in a big pile of manure like that those things would break down over time, just like everything else, into other constituents that no longer retain the properties of being a deworming pharmaceutical or whatever. So, long way of saying I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'd just sort of go for it. And I certainly have lots of worms in my garden, but do your own research and look into it. But I mean, whenever I talk about this sort of stuff, someone says, "Oh, that has this in it, and has that in it. No, you have to be worried." Just even the other day, I was talking about putting. I noticed on a Facebook page, someone was saying, "What sort of mulch should I use?" And someone said, "Don't use leaves. You don't know what's in them." My goodness, I don't understand why people live in such fear of things they can't see. Sure, there's a risk of all of those things, but if you want to live a 100% risk-free life, I don't think you're going to have a lot of fun. What is the big risk? I mean, if you put a bunch of leaves on your garden, some invasive weed seed may be in those, so you sort it out when it happens. Like anything else. I mean, I have a garden here where I got a rhubarb from someone else, and I planted the rhubarb, and there was goutweed in with the rhubarb. So it's a garden that was about 4 by 8. So for about 2 years, every time I saw goutweed, I'd sort of pick it and I'd mulch it really heavily. And I haven't seen goutweed there in 2 years, and I don't see it anywhere. I just stayed on top of it. I noticed it right away. I said, "Oh, is that parsley?" And I took a taste. I'm like, "Oh, that's not parsley. That tastes like yucky parsley sort of thing." It's kind of a goutweed tastes like a lousy version of parsley. So I just, I was just proactive with it, and it went away. So I mean, yes, you're taking risks of bringing weird things into your garden, but then you just deal with it. But the good side is that you're getting things for free, and it's easy to source, and you don't have to be all worried about stuff. So anyway, going on a bit of a rant here, and I didn't mean to do that. I know I'm going to get comments along these lines. So horse manure, great stuff, cheap, abundant. People ask me, "How do you get that? Where do you get? Do you own a horse farm?" I was like, "No, I don't, but wherever you live, if you live in a city, there's people in the city that have a lot of money and they buy horses for their daughters and stuff. And so somewhere near that city, there's a place they drive to, ride a horse for a couple hours a week. And if you live in the country, the people that have those horses for those people, for others, there are practical reasons someone would own a horse. If you go online and take a little search, wherever you live, there's probably a horse stable not too far from you, because there's people that own horses for whatever reason, and chances are they'll give you the manure. Usually they're happy to get rid of it, or you might have to pay them a certain amount. But of all the manures that you can get for a garden, horse manure is the cheapest manure you can get, because there's just so much of it and it's so abundant. It's relatively low in nutrient value, so people think it's no good, but it's great, because I have a great garden every year, and I started this whole thing with horse manure. So hope you found it interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.